The bustling atmosphere of Atlanta International Airport filled the massive terminal on a busy Monday morning. Officer James Miller, a seasoned security officer with 15 years of experience, stood at his usual post near Terminal B, his blue uniform pressed crisp and neat. At 42 years old, he took pride in maintaining order and security in one of the nation's busiest airports. The morning had been routine, checking IDs, directing lost travelers, and ensuring smooth operations through security checkpoints. Miller's attention was suddenly drawn to a man moving swiftly through the crowd. The individual, a well-built black man in his late 30s, wore dark jeans, a navy pullover, and carried a leather messenger bag across his shoulder. What caught Miller's eye wasn't just the man's hurried pace, but the way he seemed to be bypassing the regular security line, heading straight toward the gates. In Miller's experience, this kind of behavior often signaled trouble. Without hesitation, he stepped away from his post and moved to intercept the rushing traveler. "Sir, stop right there." Miller's authoritative voice carried across the terminal, causing several nearby passengers to turn their heads. The man in the navy pullover continued walking, either not hearing the command or choosing to ignore it. This only heightened Miller's suspicion. Moving faster now, Officer Miller caught up to the man, positioning himself directly in his path. "Sir, I need you to stop and show me your identification and boarding pass immediately." His hand instinctively rested on his belt, near his radio. The man finally stopped, letting out a deep sigh of frustration. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm already running late, and this is an emergency situation." His voice was deep, educated, and carried a hint of exhaustion. Miller stood his ground, scanning the man's appearance more closely now. Despite the casual clothing, he noticed the man's expensive watch and well-maintained appearance. Still, protocol was protocol. "I'm sorry, sir, but I need to see your credentials now. You can't bypass security procedures, regardless of your hurry." By this time, a small crowd had begun to gather, some people openly watching the interaction while pretending to check their phones or luggage. The tension in the air was palpable, and several travelers had their phones out, likely recording the situation. The man reached slowly into his messenger bag, maintaining eye contact with Officer Miller. "My name is Dr. Marcus Thompson. I'm being flown in for an emergency surgery at Atlanta General Hospital." He produced a hospital ID badge and what appeared to be some sort of emergency authorization papers. Miller took the documents, studying them carefully while maintaining his professional demeanor. The ID showed the man's credentials as a cardiothoracic surgeon, but Miller still felt something wasn't adding up. "Why weren't we notified about your arrival, Dr. Thompson? There are proper channels for emergency medical personnel." Just then, a woman in a hospital administrator's badge came running up to them, slightly out of breath. "Dr. Thompson, thank goodness you're here. We've been waiting at the wrong terminal." She turned to Officer Miller. "Officer, I apologize for the confusion. Dr. Thompson is here for an emergency pediatric heart surgery. The patient was flown in from Miami this morning, and we're on a very tight timeline." The atmosphere began to shift as other travelers who had been watching the scene unfold started to understand the situation. Miller felt a knot forming in his stomach as he realized he had potentially delayed a life-saving surgery. The hospital administrator continued, "We have all the necessary clearances, but there was a mix-up in communication between terminals. Dr. Thompson is one of only 3 surgeons in the country qualified to perform this specific procedure." Officer Miller's face flushed slightly as he quickly handed back Dr. Thompson's credentials. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed both understanding and urgency. The crowd around them had grown larger, with whispers and concerned looks being exchanged among the onlookers. The tension in Officer Miller's shoulders began to release as he processed the reality of the situation. He had acted on instinct and protocol, but now faced the uncomfortable realization that his quick judgment may have been influenced by more than just security concerns. As Part 1 drew to a close, the scene was set for what would become a significant moment of learning and change for Officer Miller, while Dr. Thompson's primary concern remained the critical surgery awaiting him at Atlanta General Hospital. The morning sun continued to stream through the terminal's massive windows, illuminating a situation that would soon transform from a moment of confrontation to one of profound realization. Officer Miller's world seemed to slow down as the gravity of the situation sank in. The hospital administrator, Sarah Jenkins, quickly took charge of the moment. She was a petite woman in her mid-40s, wearing a professional black suit and carrying multiple folders under her arm. "Officer Miller, I have all the emergency clearance documentation right here," Sarah said, shuffling through her papers. "We apologize for the confusion, but every minute counts in this situation." She pulled out several official documents showing hospital letterheads and airport security clearances. Dr. Thompson checked his watch, an action that seemed to carry the weight of a life hanging in the balance. "The patient is an 8-year-old boy," he explained, his voice remaining calm despite the urgency. "He has a rare congenital heart condition that's deteriorating rapidly. The surgery needs to happen within the next 3 hours." The growing crowd of onlookers began to disperse, but not before several people shot disapproving looks at Officer Miller. A young woman nearby whispered something to her companion, shaking her head. Miller felt the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck. Looking to make things right, Miller straightened his posture and made a quick decision. "Let me escort you both to expedite your passage through security," he offered, gesturing toward a priority lane usually reserved for airline crew members. "We can fast-track you through the checkpoints." As they walked briskly through the terminal, Dr. Thompson shared more details about the case. The boy, Tommy Martinez, had been flown in from Miami after his condition suddenly worsened. His parents had been searching for months to find a surgeon capable of performing the complex procedure their son needed. The success rate for this particular surgery is only about 60%, Dr. Thompson explained as they bypassed the regular security line. "But without it, Tommy has less than a week." His words carried the weight of experience and responsibility that came with his profession. Miller listened intently, feeling a mix of admiration and regret. He watched as Dr. Thompson efficiently removed his shoes and placed his belongings in the security bin, noting how the surgeon's hands that would soon be holding a child's life, moved with practiced precision. Sarah continued coordinating on her phone, speaking rapidly with the surgical team at Atlanta General. "They're prepping the OR now," she reported. "The anesthesiologist is already reviewing Tommy's charts, and his parents just arrived at the hospital." As they moved through the security checkpoint, Miller noticed something that made his chest tighten. Dr. Thompson was wearing a small pin on his messenger bag. It was a memorial pin for a children's hospital in Detroit. Curiosity got the better of him. "That pin," Miller said, pointing to it as Dr. Thompson collected his belongings. "Is it from your previous hospital?" Dr. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Yes, I worked there for 10 years. We lost a young patient. Jessica was her name, because we couldn't perform the surgery in time. Transportation issues." He paused, adjusting the pin. "That's why I never say no to emergency cases now, no matter where they are." The weight of those words hit Miller hard. His earlier actions could have contributed to exactly the kind of delay Dr. Thompson had experienced before. The realization made him feel sick to his stomach. As they approached the gate area, Sarah's phone rang again. "The surgical team is all assembled," she announced after a brief conversation. "They're just waiting for you, Dr. Thompson." Miller watched as Dr. Thompson checked his watch one final time. The doctor then turned to him, extending his hand. "Officer Miller, I understand you were doing your job, but time is critical in my line of work. Maybe we can work on improving the system for emergency medical personnel in the future." Taking the offered hand, Miller nodded firmly. "I'll personally see to it, Dr. Thompson, and I'm sorry for the delay." The words felt inadequate, but they were sincere. As Dr. Thompson and Sarah hurried toward their gate, Miller stood watching their retreating figures. The morning sun cast long shadows through the terminal windows, and he could hear the usual airport announcements echoing in the background. But something had changed in him, a lesson learned that would affect every future interaction in his career. A young janitor who had witnessed the entire scene approached Miller, pushing his cleaning cart. "Sometimes the biggest mistakes teach us the most important lessons, right, officer?" he said quietly before moving on, leaving Miller to reflect on the profound truth in those simple words. Back at his post, Officer Miller couldn't shake the morning's events from his mind. The constant flow of travelers through the terminal seemed like background noise as he replayed the interaction with Dr. Thompson over and over in his head. His radio crackled with routine security updates, but his thoughts remained focused on the surgeon rushing to save the young boy's life. Around noon, Miller's supervisor, Captain Roberts, approached him with a serious expression. Miller, we need to talk about what happened this morning. Several passengers had submitted complaints about the incident, and security camera footage had already been reviewed by airport management. In the break room, Captain Roberts closed the door and sat across from Miller. James, I've known you for 10 years. You're one of our best officers, but this morning's incident is causing quite a stir. Some of the video is already circulating on social media. Miller's stomach dropped. He hadn't noticed anyone recording, but in today's world, cameras were everywhere. Sir, I was following protocol, but I realize now I could have handled it differently, he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. As they discussed the situation, Miller's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, Claire, a nursing student at Emory University. Dad, are you okay? There's a video going around of you at the airport this morning. Some of my classmates are talking about it. The reality of how quickly information spread in the digital age hit Miller hard. Before he could respond to Claire, Captain Roberts slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal request from Atlanta General Hospital for Miller to attend their emergency response coordination meeting next week. They want to establish better protocols for medical personnel arriving for emergencies, Captain Roberts explained. Dr. Thompson suggested you be part of the discussion. Apparently, he was impressed by how you handled the situation once you understood the circumstances. Miller was surprised. Despite his initial mistake, the surgeon had seen value in his perspective. As they continued their discussion, a breaking news alert appeared on the break room television. The headline read, 8-year-old Miami boy undergoes life-saving heart surgery at Atlanta General. Both men turned to watch as the reporter shared details about Tommy Martinez's rare condition and the emergency flight that brought Dr. Thompson to Atlanta. The boy's parents, Maria and Roberto Martinez, were shown outside the hospital, their faces filled with hope and gratitude. The surgery began just over an hour ago, the reporter announced. Dr. Marcus Thompson, one of the nation's leading pediatric heart surgeons, is performing the procedure. Hospital officials estimate it will take approximately 6 hours. Miller checked his watch. If he hadn't delayed Dr. Thompson, even for those few minutes, he couldn't complete the thought. Captain Roberts seemed to read his mind. James, this can be a learning opportunity for the entire department, he said, standing up. We need to balance security with humanity. Sometimes that's a tough line to walk. As Miller prepared to return to his post, he received another text, this time from an unknown number. It was Sarah Jenkins, the hospital administrator. Officer Miller, Dr. Thompson is still in surgery, but I wanted you to know that we made it in time. Tommy's initial readings are stable. Thank you for your help in expediting our arrival after the initial delay. The message brought both relief and renewed perspective. Miller walked back to his post with a different energy. He observed the diverse crowd of travelers with fresh eyes, doctors, patients, families, all carrying their own urgent stories and responsibilities. Later that afternoon, a group of young medical residents passed through his checkpoint, clearly in a hurry. Miller noticed their hospital IDs and remembered Dr. Thompson's words about improving the system. He quickly directed them to the priority lane, earning grateful smiles. As his shift neared its end, Miller drafted an email to the airport's security management team, outlining suggestions for a new fast-track system for verified medical personnel. He included his morning's experience as a case study, openly acknowledging his mistakes and the lessons learned. The sun was setting as Miller gathered his belongings to head home. On the drive, he planned to stop by the hospital, not to check on Dr. Thompson or Tommy, as they would both still be in the OR, but to start learning more about the daily challenges faced by emergency medical personnel. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. His daughter Claire's words from another text echoed in his mind. Dad, mistakes don't define us. How we learn from them does. As he merged onto the highway, Miller realized that this day, despite its difficult beginning, might lead to positive changes for everyone involved. The following day, Officer Miller arrived at his shift earlier than usual. The morning news was dominated by updates about Tommy Martinez's surgery. Dr. Thompson and his team had worked for nearly 8 hours, and the procedure was successful. The headlines celebrated it as a miracle surgery, but Miller couldn't help thinking about how close they had come to missing their window of opportunity. Around mid-morning, a group of medical students wearing Emory University badges passed through security. One of them, a young black woman, approached Miller. Officer Miller? I'm Jessica Howard, your daughter Claire's classmate. She told me about you wanting to learn more about emergency medical transport. Miller remembered Claire mentioning Jessica, one of the top students in her class. Yes, I'm actually working on a proposal for improving our medical personnel protocols, he replied, grateful for the opportunity to discuss it with someone in the field. Jessica shared stories about her clinical rotations and the challenges medical staff face during emergencies. Sometimes minutes make the difference between life and death, she explained. Last month, we lost a patient because a specialist was delayed at another airport. Their conversation was interrupted by Miller's radio. The airport was receiving another emergency medical team, this time for an organ transport. Without hesitation, Miller implemented some of the lessons he'd learned from the previous day's experience. He quickly coordinated with other security officers to create a clear path for the medical team. As he helped facilitate their swift passage through security, Miller noticed Sarah Jenkins watching from near the coffee shop. After the medical team passed through, she approached him with a coffee in hand. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering him the cup. "Dr. Thompson asked me to give you an update. Tommy is stable and responding well to the surgery. His parents wanted to thank you for helping get Dr. Thompson to him in time, despite the initial delay." Miller accepted the coffee, surprised by the gesture. How did they even know about what happened at the airport? Sarah smiled. "The video may have gone viral, Officer Miller, but what most people don't see is what happened after. How you helped expedite things and are now working to improve the system." Dr. Thompson mentioned that in his morning press conference. The conversation with Sarah revealed more about the challenges hospitals faced with emergency medical transport. She shared stories of other close calls and successful saves, painting a picture of the complex network of professionals working together to save lives. Later that afternoon, Miller received an email from the airport administration. His proposal for a new medical personnel verification system had caught their attention. They wanted him to lead a task force to develop and implement improved protocols. As he read through the email, a commotion near the main entrance caught his attention. A woman was desperately trying to get through security, explaining that her father had just been admitted to Atlanta General with a severe heart condition. Miller approached the situation calmly, remembering his recent experiences. After verifying her story with the hospital, he helped her navigate through security quickly and efficiently. The gratitude in her eyes reminded him of why he had chosen this career in the first place, to help people, not to be a barrier. Near the end of his shift, Miller's phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source. It was a photo from Dr. Thompson, showing Tommy Martinez giving a weak but triumphant thumbs up from his hospital bed. The message read, "Thought you'd like to see why every minute matters. Thank you for turning a challenging moment into an opportunity for positive change." Looking at the photo of the young boy whose life hung in the balance just yesterday, Miller felt a profound sense of purpose. His mistake could have had tragic consequences, but instead, it had become a catalyst for important changes in the airport security system. As the sun set outside the terminal windows, Miller watched families reuniting, medical professionals rushing to their destinations, and everyday travelers going about their journeys. Each person had their own story, their own urgency, their own purpose. His job wasn't just about maintaining security. It was about facilitating these human moments while keeping everyone safe. The lessons of the past 2 days had transformed not just his approach to his work, but his understanding of the delicate balance between duty and compassion. The incident with Dr. Thompson wasn't just a viral moment. It was becoming a turning point in airport security procedures and, more importantly, in Miller's own journey of growth and understanding. A week after the incident, Officer Miller found himself walking through the pristine halls of Atlanta General Hospital. He had been invited to speak at a joint conference between hospital administration and airport security about improving emergency medical transport protocols. The hospital's atmosphere was vastly different from the airport's controlled chaos. Nurses rushed past with determined expressions, doctors consulted charts, and families waited anxiously in designated areas. Miller felt out of place in his uniform, but a familiar face soon appeared. Sarah Jenkins was walking toward him with Dr. Thompson by her side. "Officer Miller," Dr. Thompson greeted him warmly, extending his hand. "I'm glad you could make it. Tommy's parents are here today, and they've been asking to meet you." The surgeon looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that comes from successful outcomes. They walked together to the pediatric cardiac unit, where Maria and Roberto Martinez sat beside their son's bed. Tommy, though still connected to various monitors, was sitting up and playing with a tablet. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, a sight that seemed miraculous given his condition just a week ago. "This is Officer Miller." Dr. Thompson introduced him to the family. "He's the one who helped us get to Tommy in time, despite our initial misunderstanding." Maria Martinez stood up, tears in her eyes, and hugged Miller unexpectedly. "Thank you," she whispered. "The doctors told us how close it was, that even a 30-minute delay could have changed everything." Roberto joined them, carrying Tommy's latest scan results. "Look," he said proudly, showing Miller the images. "Dr. Thompson says his heart is getting stronger every day." The reality of what could have been lost hit Miller hard. Tommy looked up from his tablet and gave a shy wave, unaware of how his case had changed airport security protocols and touched so many lives. As they left the room, Dr. Thompson pulled Miller aside. "Your new security protocols saved another life yesterday," he revealed. "A transplant team made it through your airport in record time. The heart they were carrying had a 4-hour window, and thanks to your new system, they made it with time to spare." They walked toward the conference room where hospital staff and airport security officials were gathering. Along the way, they passed the hospital's wall of hope. Photos of patients who had beaten the odds. A space was being prepared for Tommy's picture. During the conference, Miller shared his experience openly, discussing both his initial mistakes and the lessons learned. He presented the new verification system for medical personnel, which included immediate digital confirmation of credentials and dedicated fast-track lanes for verified emergency medical teams. "We can maintain security without creating unnecessary barriers," Miller explained to the attendees. "Every minute counts in emergency medicine, and our job is to facilitate safe, swift passage for those racing against time." After the presentation, a young security officer approached Miller. "Sir, I watched that video of you and Dr. Thompson dozens of times," she admitted. "But what inspired me most was how you turned it into an opportunity for change." As the conference wrapped up, Dr. Thompson shared some news with Miller. "We're presenting these protocols at a national security conference next month. Several major airports have already expressed interest in implementing similar systems." Walking back through the hospital corridors, Miller stopped at the gift shop. He bought a small stuffed animal, a lion wearing a doctor's coat, and asked a nurse to deliver it to Tommy. The card simply read, "Stay strong, young warrior, Officer Miller." Before leaving the hospital, Miller took one last look at the wall of hope. Soon, Tommy's smile would join the others, a testament to the incredible things that happen when people work together, learn from their mistakes, and put humanity first. Back at the airport that evening, Miller watched as another medical team rushed through his checkpoint. The new system worked smoothly, their credentials were verified within seconds, and they passed through security without delay. One of the nurses gave him a grateful nod as they hurried past. As his shift ended, Miller received a text from Dr. Thompson. It was another photo of Tommy, this time hugging the stuffed lion, his smile brighter than before. The message read, "He named it Officer Lion. Says it keeps him safe while he sleeps, just like you help keep others safe at the airport." Miller smiled, tucking his phone away. The terminal lights dimmed slightly as evening approached, but the impact of the changes they'd made would continue to shine brightly, saving precious minutes and, ultimately, precious lives. 2 weeks after the conference at Atlanta General Hospital, Officer Miller found himself dealing with unexpected media attention. A major news network had picked up the story of how a tense airport confrontation had transformed into a catalyst for. The morning began with a camera crew setting up near his security checkpoint. They were filming a special segment about the new medical personnel fast-track system that had been implemented. Miller watched as Sarah Jenkins demonstrated the process, showing how medical teams could now be verified and cleared within minutes. Since implementing these changes, Sarah explained to the reporter, "We've successfully expedited 15 emergency medical transports. That's 15 families who didn't have to wait those extra crucial minutes." During his lunch break, Miller sat in the break room watching Tommy Martinez's story on the news. The 8-year-old was being discharged from the hospital today, and cameras captured him walking out under his own power, clutching Officer Lion to his chest. Dr. Thompson stood nearby, explaining the medical miracle to reporters. What makes this case special isn't just the surgery, Dr. Thompson said on screen. It's how it sparked a revolution in emergency medical transport procedures. Other airports are now adopting what they're calling the Atlanta model. Miller's phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor. The airport director wanted to see him immediately. Walking to the administrative offices, Miller passed the spot where he had first stopped Dr. Thompson. A small plaque had been installed there, marking the location where change began. The airport director, Mrs. Chen, was waiting with several officials from other major airports. "Officer Miller," she began, "these gentlemen are interested in having you consult on implementing our new system at their facilities." As they discussed the details, Miller's radio crackled with an urgent message. Another emergency medical team was incoming, this time with a critical situation. Without hesitation, he excused himself to personally oversee their passage through security. The team was transporting a newborn baby requiring immediate heart surgery. Thanks to the new system, they cleared security in less than 3 minutes. As they rushed past, one of the visiting airport officials checked his stopwatch, clearly impressed. Later that afternoon, Claire stopped by the airport on her way to her hospital rotation. She brought news that Tommy Martinez had asked about Miller during his discharge. "He wants you to come to his welcome home party this weekend," she said, handing him an invitation decorated with childish drawings of lions and airplanes. As Miller's shift continued, he noticed a familiar face approaching his checkpoint. Dr. Thompson was returning from a medical conference. This time, their interaction was completely different from their first encounter. "Officer Miller," Dr. Thompson called out warmly, "I just presented our protocol changes to the National Medical Transportation Conference. You've started something remarkable here." They talked briefly about Tommy's recovery and the growing interest in the new security system. Dr. Thompson shared stories of other hospitals adopting similar protocols and how it was changing emergency response times across the country. "You know," Dr. Thompson said thoughtfully, "sometimes the biggest changes come from our most difficult moments. What could have been a tragic story became something that's saving lives." As evening approached, Miller received an unexpected visitor. Roberto Martinez had come to the airport to personally deliver something. It was a framed photo of Tommy, standing strong and healthy, holding Officer Lyon. The frame bore an inscription, "To the man who learned to see with his heart." The day ended with Miller conducting a training session for new security officers. He used his experience with Dr. Thompson as a teaching moment, emphasizing the importance of balancing security with compassion. "Our job isn't just about following rules," he told the trainees. "It's about understanding that behind every rush, every emergency, there's a human story. Sometimes, lives depend on how we handle those moments." As he gathered his things to head home, Miller noticed a small package on his desk. Inside was a miniature version of the plaque that had been installed in the terminal, along with a note from Mrs. Chen, for the officer who turned a moment of conflict into a movement of change. Looking out at the bustling terminal, Miller watched as travelers rushed to their destinations, each carrying their own urgent stories. The new protocols hummed efficiently in the background, a silent guardian for those racing against time. What had started as one of the most challenging days of his career had become a turning point not just for him, but for countless others whose lives depended on those precious saved minutes. 1 month after implementing the new protocols, Officer Miller stood at Tommy Martinez's welcome home party. The Martinez family had transformed their backyard into a celebration of life, complete with a cake decorated like an airplane and streamers in hospital scrub blue. Tommy ran around with other children, his surgery scar barely visible under his superhero shirt. Officer Lyon, now slightly worn from constant companionship, sat in a place of honor on a decorated chair. What caught Miller's attention most was a large poster board filled with photos, a timeline of Tommy's journey from sick child to thriving survivor. "Officer Miller," Maria Martinez called out, waving him over to a group of guests. "Come meet some of the other families." She introduced him to parents whose children had also benefited from the new airport protocols, each with their own story of racing against time. Among the guests was Jessica Howard, the medical student who had helped Miller understand the challenges faced by emergency medical teams. She was now doing her residency under Dr. Thompson's guidance at Atlanta General. "You become quite famous at the hospital," Jessica told him, showing him her phone. The medical staff had created a special alert system they nicknamed the Miller Protocol for coordinating with airport security during emergencies. Dr. Thompson arrived later, having just finished another successful surgery. He brought news that made the party even more special. The Atlanta model has been adopted by 20 major airports across the country, he announced. Last week, it helped save a 4-year-old in Chicago. As the afternoon progressed, Miller found himself sitting with Tommy, who was eager to show him a drawing. It depicted Officer Miller, Dr. Thompson, and Officer Lyon standing together at the airport, all wearing superhero capes. "Mom says you guys are like superheroes," Tommy explained, "but instead of fighting bad guys, you fight against time to save people." The party was briefly interrupted by an urgent call. Dr. Thompson was needed for another emergency surgery, and thanks to the system Miller had helped create, the doctor knew he could reach the airport and pass through security without delay. Before leaving, Dr. Thompson pulled Miller aside. "Remember that memorial pin I was wearing the day we met?" he asked. "For Jessica, the girl we lost in Detroit. Her parents called me yesterday. They've been following our story, and they're working to implement similar protocols in Michigan." The impact of their chance encounter continued to ripple outward. Later that evening, Miller received a call from the airport director. The Department of Homeland Security had taken notice of their success and wanted to make the Atlanta model a national standard for medical emergency protocols. As the party wound down, Roberto Martinez gathered everyone for a toast. "A month ago, we almost lost our son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But because of a moment that could have gone very wrong but went right, not only is Tommy here with us, but other families will have their miracles too." Tommy insisted on walking Miller to his car, clutching Officer Lyon tightly. "Dad says you made a mistake but fixed it," the boy said with the simple wisdom of children. "That's what makes you a real hero." Driving home, Miller reflected on how much had changed in just 1 month. His daughter Claire had told him about studying the new protocols in her medical ethics class. The incident that could have ended his career had instead become a case study in turning confrontation into cooperation. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Jenkins. Another emergency transport had just been successfully expedited through the airport. The message included a photo of the medical team giving thumbs up as they rushed through security. At home, Miller found a letter in his mailbox from the airport administration. They wanted him to lead a national training program, teaching other airports how to implement the new system. His mistake had become a masterclass in learning and change. Before going to bed, Miller looked at Tommy's drawing one more time. The superhero capes made him smile, but it was the message scrawled in a child's handwriting that touched him most deeply. "Thank you for helping Dr. Thompson save me. Love, Tommy, and Officer Lyon." The day's events had proven once again that sometimes the best changes come from our biggest challenges, and that true heroism often lies not in being perfect, but in learning from our mistakes and using them to help others. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Officer Miller stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a national conference on emergency medical transport security. The audience included airport officials, medical professionals, and security experts from across the country. Behind him, a large screen displayed statistics. Over 200 successful emergency medical transports facilitated through the new system, an average time saving of 12 minutes per emergency, and 43 airports now implementing the Atlanta model. "What began as a confrontation taught me the most valuable lesson of my career," Miller told the audience. "Security isn't just about following rules, it's about protecting lives in every sense of the word." Dr. Thompson sat in the front row, having just finished his own presentation on the medical impact of the new protocols. Next to him was Sarah Jenkins, who had become the national coordinator for emergency medical transport systems. During the break, Miller checked his phone to find a video message from Tommy. The boy was wearing a police officer costume for career day at school, with Officer Lyon, now well-loved and slightly shabby, proudly displayed on his desk. "I told my whole class about you and Dr. Thompson," Tommy announced proudly. The conference had drawn international attention. Representatives from hospitals in Europe and Asia were studying the Atlanta model, looking to implement similar systems in their countries. What had started as a tense moment in an airport terminal was now influencing emergency medical transport globally. Later that afternoon, Miller participated in a panel discussion with other security officials. One asked about the challenge of maintaining security while increasing speed. Miller's response was simple: when we understand what's at stake, we find better ways to do our jobs. During the discussion, breaking news flashed across the conference screens. A medical team using the new protocols had just successfully transported a donor heart from Atlanta to Chicago, saving a teenage girl's life. The timing couldn't have been more perfect to demonstrate the system's impact. After the conference, Miller met with Tommy's parents, who had flown in to share their story. Maria Martinez now volunteered at Atlanta General, helping families navigate the emergency medical transport system. Roberto had started a foundation to help other families facing similar medical crises. You know what Tommy said last week? Maria shared with Miller. He said when he grows up, he wants to be both a doctor like Dr. Thompson and a police officer like you. He says that way he can help people twice as much. As the day went down, Miller received an unexpected honor. The Department of Homeland Security announced the creation of the Miller-Thompson Initiative, a national program to train airport security officers in emergency medical transport protocols while promoting understanding and cooperation between law enforcement and medical professionals. Dr. Thompson approached Miller after the announcement. "Remember when I said sometimes the biggest changes come from our most difficult moments?" he asked. "Look around. This is bigger than either of us could have imagined." The two men, once on opposite sides of a tense confrontation, now stood together as pioneers of a system that was saving lives daily. Their story had become a testament to how learning from mistakes could lead to meaningful change. Before leaving Washington, Miller visited the National Air and Space Museum. In a new exhibit about aviation safety and security, he found a familiar item on display, a replica of Officer Lyon, alongside the story of how a moment of conflict led to a revolution in emergency medical transport. Back at Atlanta International Airport the following week, Miller watched as a new group of security officers trained on the protocols. Among them was a diverse team of young officers, each committed to maintaining security while understanding the human stories behind every emergency. His phone buzzed with one last surprise, a message from Tommy's doctor. The boy's latest checkup showed his heart was now functioning perfectly. The message included a photo of Tommy giving a thumbs up, wearing a shirt that read, "My heart works because heroes work together." As the sun set on another busy day at the airport, Miller reflected on how a single incident had sparked such widespread change. The terminal where he had stopped Dr. Thompson was now a smooth-running checkpoint where medical teams moved efficiently through security, carrying hope and healing to those in need. The story that began with a confrontation had transformed into a legacy of cooperation, understanding, and saved lives, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come from our willingness to learn, adapt, and see the humanity in every situation.